One way or another, you'll be giving it up. One way or another, you'll be giving it up. To the sellouts, living it up. One way or another, you'll be giving it up. Scream if you feel me. Holler if you hear me. Scream if you feel me. You're too near me. See it clearly. Holler if you hear me. Scream if you feel me. Feel me. Scream if you feel me. See it clearly. You're too near me. Holler if you hear me.
One of the things you notice when looking back at the end of WCW and researching general opinions of the company just before their ultimate demise is that no one has a bad thing to say about Lance Storm and his work in those final months of WCW. Lance Storm, quite simply, was one of the very best pure wrestlers that WCW had before the doors closed. And in a rare instance of WCW noticing what they had very early on, Lance was given a great push right from the beginning, even though the initial plans for Lance were questionable to say the least. Storm had just finished up a great 3-year run at ECW before arriving in World Championship Wrestling. Lance was able to win the ECW Tag Team titles on 3 separate occasions. But as we're going to find out, it took Lance very little time to begin collecting title belts in World Championship Wrestling. This is the story of Lance Storm and Team Canada in WCW. At the time of Lance's debut, Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff were heading creative, and Lance revealed on Dave Penzer's podcast that Vince Russo wanted Lance to portray Bischoff's illegitimate son due to the two men having the same, quote, arrogant look. Lance said he looked over at Eric when this was pitched and Bischoff just rolled his eyes. And thankfully, this plan never came to be. It's incredible to think of how bad things could have been here, in contrast to how good Lance's early days in the company turned out to be, but yeah, Lance Storm, ECW superstar, the son of Eric Bischoff. To introduce WCW fans to Lance Storm, he would appear from the audience to attack WCW superstars who he thought were making a mockery of wrestling. This went on for a few weeks before Lance had his first official WCW match against the Filthy Animals Disco Inferno on the 26th of June 2000 episode of Nitro, a match that Lance won, although it was a little short at only 3 minutes long. Par for the course really for WCW Nitro matches at the time. The Animals attacked Storm after the match and Billy Kidman came to Lance's aid, and so an on-screen friendship was formed. On the June 28th episode of Thunder, a tag team match was booked featuring Storm and Billy Kidman taking on Juventud Guerrera and Rey Mysterio. And before the match, Lance cut a promo where he said he doesn't need to scream and shout to get his point across. He doesn't pose, he doesn't dance. Lance Storm is from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, so his actions in the ring will do the talking for him. Fans who never saw Lance Storm in ECW or anywhere else for that matter were then given a taste of what Lance could really do in the ring. Storm and Kidman won their tag team match, and keep in mind that Lance was introduced to fans here as a babyface. On the following episode of Nitro, the Filthy Animals made fun of Storm and Kidman by having Rey Mysterio and Juventud Guerrera dress up like their opponents. After taking jabs at Lance's lack of personality, Storm and Kidman hit the ring and a rematch from Thunder took place. This time Mysterio and Guerrera were victorious. But again, it gave fans another taste of what Lance could do inside the ropes. The Storm and Kidman vs Filthy Animals rivalry continued. Kidman would try to get Storm to loosen up a little, but Lance said he's from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, so he doesn't joke around, he wrestles. Storm's commitment and love for Canada began to irritate fans as a slow heel turn began mere weeks after Lance's debut. Storm would remind fans that he isn't in WCW to be an entertainer or provide fans with the sideshow antics of sports entertainment. He was there to fight and he was there to win championships. Lance would also request that the Canadian national anthem got played before his matches. And yet, just to get it out of the way, it was very reminiscent of Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation in 1997, but as we'll soon find out, Bret was very much behind Lance Storm during this time period. It didn't take long for Billy Kidman to begin making fun of Lance Storm and how serious he was about Canada, and on the July 12th, 2000 episode of Thunder, Lance completed his heel turn after super kicking Kidman after the team lost to Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare. Later in the evening, Storm had a one-on-one match with Kidman, and even though, again, it was only 3 minutes long, the bout was very, very good. Kidman got the pinfall victory, and the relationship between Billy and Lance had ended. But on the next episode of Nitro, Lance was able to win a tournament for the United States Championship. Storm defeated Buff Bagwell, Shane Douglas, and Mike Awesome to win the gold. Lance had warned WCW beforehand that the US title will get renamed to the Canadian Heavyweight title if and when he won the tournament. And well, Lance won every match with his Canadian Maple Leaf submission hold, and on the following episode of Thunder, Lance delivered on his promise. Storm talked about the great US champions of the past before announcing that the US title was dead. He then produced a sticker that he placed on top of the belt, and the Canadian Heavyweight Championship was born. Lance then brought a fan into the ring, and he said that it wasn't her fault that the American healthcare system couldn't help the fan with her weight problem, and this led to Mike Awesome hitting the ring. Eventually, Kanyon and Buff Bagwell also came down, and a tag team match was subsequently booked for later in the evening. Kanyon and Storm versus Buff and Awesome. Kanyon got the win with a Kanyon cutter. On the very next episode of Nitro, the show kicked off with Big Vito, the hardcore champion, interrupting the Canadian heavyweight champion. Vito wanted a fight, and Lance was more than happy to oblige. Lance also said he'll put his Canadian championship on the line if Vito puts the hardcore title up for grabs also. The match took place immediately and Lance won. Storm had just picked up another championship title within WCW, and keep in mind, he'd only been in the company for a month at this point. Vito wanted his hardcore title back on Thunder, but Lance said he wouldn't wrestle in a hardcore match. Instead, he'd wrestle in a Canadian rules match. The rules of this Canadian match weren't explained. All we knew was that no weapons were allowed, just holds and wrestling moves. So yeah, it was a singles match. Even though Lance announced that he didn't want any weapons involved, the dual champion still used a steel chair when the referee took a bump, and in the end, Lance won with his Canadian Maple Leaf hold. When Lance wouldn't let go, Mike Awesome ran in to save Vito. Mike Awesome vs Lance Storm was then made official for the WCW New Blood Rising pay-per-view. Lance wasn't finished collecting belts. Incredibly, Storm would win another championship on the next episode of Nitro, but before doing so, Storm wanted to address the audience. Storm said that because he's from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, he thinks that hardcore wrestling is garbage. So in order to bring prestige to the hardcore title that he won last week, Lance changes the belt's name to the Saskatchewan Hardcore International title, the SHIT. Brilliant, though it does sound like a Vince Russo thing, doesn't it? Lance also said that due to his dominance in WCW, the company should be renamed to World Canadian Wrestling. And to show how dominant Lance was, he won the Cruiserweight title right after cutting this promo, a title Lance renamed the 100 kilograms and under championship. People write off these dying days of WCW, but this was a big deal. A WCW superstar held 3 singles titles at the same time, something that had never been accomplished before. How did WCW mark this occasion? By having Kevin Nash come down and hit Storm with a big boot. Seriously, that's what happened. Nash was due to cut an unrelated promo after Storm's segment. The segue here was Lance taking a big boot, and the show continued on. Let's jump forward to New Blood Rising then, where Storm defended his Canadian Heavyweight Championship against Mike Awesome. Lance wanted this match contested under Canadian rules again. Keep in mind that the pay-per-view was held in Vancouver. Lance had a Goldberg-esque entrance where security guards brought him to the curtain, and inside the ring, Lance cut a promo that will definitely remind you of the interviews Bret Hart would deliver in Canada during the Hitman's time as a heel. Lance praised the Canadian fans, and he said he's happy to perform in front of real fans instead of Americans. Lance then explained that he's a marked man, and that's why he had a security team bring him to the curtain. And then, I love this, Lance invokes Rule 32B of a Canadian rules match, the right to choose his own secondary referee. The crowd chants for Bret Hart, but out walks Jacques Rougeau to officiate the match. You may think the odds were now stacked against Mike Awesome, but there's more, way more. Remember how the actual rules of a Canadian rules match weren't made official? Well, we learn all about the rules as the match progresses. Rougeau had the rule book with him, and we learned pretty early on that the book states the winner must win via a 5 count during a pin, and not a traditional 3 count. Mike Awesome had the match won, but Rougeau made sure the match continued. Not only that, but Awesome also learned that there were no submissions in a Canadian rules match, and more rules were added that favoured Lance Storm. I want you to listen to the crowd reaction here when Lance kicks out after 3. The fans in attendance just get it, and it honestly sounds like a laugh track has been added to the match.
But, no, 4 count. This is magnificent technical.
Did you also know in a Canadian rules match that after a competitor gets pinned for the 5 count, they also have 10 seconds afterwards to get back on their feet and continue the match? It's so ridiculous, but it worked. The fans loved seeing Storm get chance after chance. In the end, Awesome put Storm through a table, and Jacques Rougeau says if both men are down for a 10 count for any reason, then the first man who gets to his feet will be declared the winner. Rougeau makes sure that Awesome doesn't get back to his feet, and Lance Storm wins the match. A really fun and underrated bout here. Bret Hart's music then plays in the arena. Fans are unsure how Bret feels about all of this, but it turns out the Hitman approves of Lance Storm. Hart, Rougeau and Lance celebrate in the ring. Team Canada was made official the next night on Monday Nitro when Mike Awesome got a rematch. This time Ernest Miller would referee the bout. Jacques Rougeau came out to attack Miller, and Carl Ouellet showed up to help Rougeau and Storm take out Awesome. When Ernest Miller woke up, he was attacked again, only this time it was by Elix Skipper. After the attack, Storm went backstage with Team Canada, and he handed Carl his Saskatchewan Hardcore International title, and Skipper was given the 100 kilograms and under championship. Carl dropped the title later in the evening to Norman Smiley, while Skipper successfully defended his championship against Kiwi. On the following episode of Thunder then, Team Canada were heavily featured. Not only did the new faction have a match against the Misfits in Action, but Lance also took on Ernest Miller in a Canadian title versus WCW Commissionership bout. Team Canada won the 6-man tag match, and Lance pulled off one of the most beautiful drop kicks you'll ever see during the match, but the Canadian title bout ended with a DQ win for the Cat. That was kinda predictable. Later in the evening, Carl Ouellet was defeated by Big Vito, and both Carl and Jacques Rougeau would leave WCW afterwards, meaning that Team Canada was now down to 2 members. After this episode of Thunder, Storm and Skipper would continue their rivalry with the Misfits in Action. Storm would mainly work with Hugh G. Rection, better known as Bill DeMott, and it was DeMott who ended up taking the Canadian Championship away from Lance Storm, and to me, that was a mistake. I actually feel that Lance giving away the Hardcore and Cruiserweight titles also was a mistake, but what's done is done. Lance was never going to hold all the titles forever with the Canadian rebranding, but it was just good to see a truly great wrestler being so dominant. This was WCW in 2000 we're talking about here, after all. That being said, the Canadian Heavyweight Championship changed hands a few times between DeMott and Storm, and throughout this rivalry, new members were also added to Team Canada. First, we should look at the August 28th episode of Nitro, where Lance challenged the Misfits to a prisoner of war match. Whoever won a tables match later that evening would be able to take a member from the losing competitor's faction as a prisoner. Storm ended up defeating AWOL, and he took Major Guns as his prisoner. And the following week, Skipper and Storm were seen trying to convert Guns into a Canadian through grueling and hard workouts. And Major Guns ended up becoming a reluctant member of Team Canada, as revealed on the September 6th episode of Thunder. Speaking of this Thunder episode, a worked shoot promo took place between Bret Hart and Bill Goldberg, where Bret blamed Goldberg for ending his career. Goldberg said he was just doing his job as a professional wrestler, but Bret was angry at how Goldberg ended the legacy of the Hitman, and in the end, no one cared about Bret. Team Canada had a few words for Goldberg later in the show. Lance and company were not pleased with how Goldberg spoke to a legend like Bret Hart, A handicap match was then booked for the main event of Thunder, Skipper and Storm versus Goldberg, and predictably again, Goldberg completely decimated his opponents. Storm defended his Canadian Championship against Demott at Fall Brawl 2000, and American hero Hacksaw Jim Duggan was announced as the guest ring enforcer. Major Guns was desperate for general erection to win this match so she could go back to the Misfits, but in the end, Hacksaw Jim Duggan turned his back on the USA by hitting Demott with his 2x4. Duggan had just become a member of Team Canada. Duggan then destroyed the other members of MIA after the bout, and yeah, this was another misstep in my opinion, but sure, Team Canada now consisted of Lance Storm, Elix Skipper, Major Guns, and Jim Duggan. During a house show in Amarillo, Texas, Terry Funk defeated Lance Storm for the Canadian Heavyweight title, though Storm regained the championship the very next night. On TV, WCW carried on as if these title changes never happened, which was standard protocol for title changes like this. Moving forward, Jim Duggan teamed up with Lance Storm to do battle with Demott at Halloween Havoc. The Canadian title was on the line in this handicap match, and Lance Storm lost the championship when Demott pinned Duggan. This also meant that Guns could go back to the Misfits, and Lance, understandably, was pissed off. The next night on Monday Nitro, the superstars of WCW applauded Demott. They were doing this whole thing here where Demott had never gotten a fair chance in WCW, and this was a kind of celebratory moment for the whole company. But Lance Storm interrupted the festivities, saying that General Erection didn't defeat Lance Storm for the belt. A rematch is announced for the Mayhem pay-per-view, but Lance didn't need to wait until Mayhem before winning the title back. A match was booked on the Monday Nitro that took place in the UK. Lance puts the Canadian Maple Leaf on Demott, and Major Guns throws in the towel, allowing Lance to win the US title once again and rechristen it to the Canadian Championship. Guns had turned her back on the Misfits to rejoin Team Canada. The Mayhem match still took place between Demott and Storm, and Demott won the title back. It was a total mess. Team Canada and Lance Storm would then begin feuding with Ernest Miller, the Filthy Animals, and there were a few odd matches here and there with the Misfits. Starrcade 2000 saw Storm defeating Ernest Miller. Hacksaw Jim Duggan's future within Team Canada was in question, but he decided to help Storm win the bout. And as a thank you, Team Canada attacked Duggan afterwards, and Jim was kicked out of the group. Duggan was replaced by Mike Awesome, and people may have thought that Mike Awesome was a weird choice for Team Canada, but he was part of the 1993 FMW Team Canada. Yeah, that's a stretch, but he did provide the WCW faction with their own bus, so surely he wasn't that bad. I'm going to wrap this one up now, as I'd just be rhyming off wins and losses for the final few months of Lance's WCW career. There were no more title wins in the future. Storm stayed with WCW right to the end, and during the final weeks of the company, he could mostly be found working tag team matches along with Mike Awesome. At WCW Sin, Team Canada defeated the Filthy Animals. At Super Brawl Revenge, Storm lost to Ernest Miller in a match where the winner would become the WCW Commissioner, and keep in mind that this stipulation was also added to a Cat vs Storm match that we already saw on Thunder. And at WCW Greed, Lance Storm and Mike Awesome defeated Demott and Conan. Demott was back to using his Hugh Morris ring name. Elix Skipper and Major Guns left the group, and this means that in the end, only Storm and Awesome remained. Lance and Mike challenged Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Hare on the very last episode of Monday Nitro for the tag titles, but they were unable to capture the gold. And that was the rather brief story of Lance Storm's run in WCW and the Team Canada faction. It kinda leaves you feeling a little empty, and it does feel like there was some incredible potential here that got squandered, but again, it was late WCW. Simply put, I think that Lance Storm was too good for the dying World Championship Wrestling of 2000 and 2001. But of course, following WCW, Lance made his way to the WWF to take part in the Invasion storyline, but we'll talk about Lance and the World Wrestling Federation another time. Lance was able to team up with Mike Awesome during the WWF Invasion pay-per-view, the last remaining members of Team Canada being able to work together in the World Wrestling Federation was kinda good to see, especially for those who still watch WCW during the company's dying days. Still, for people who haven't seen any of this stuff yet, viewing Lance Storm's work in WCW would be like finding buried treasure. There's some really good stuff here if you take the time to hunt it down. And while you may not like the segments that take place before and after, the matches Lance had in World Championship Wrestling are definitely worth your time. Though, if I'm honest, you'd probably be better starting off at ECW before checking this stuff out. If you want to watch good wrestling matches, look up Lance Storm. The guy wasn't lying when he said he doesn't sing and he doesn't dance. And while many people would call that detrimental, and maybe these people aren't wrong, at least you know exactly what you're getting when watching Lance Storm perform in the ring. At the moment, Lance appears weekly on the Wrestling Observer's Figure 4 radio show, and Lance also runs the Storm Wrestling Academy. Currently, Lance is offering virtual training for those wanting to break into the world of professional wrestling, so check out stormwrestling.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.
One way or another, you've been giving it up to the sellouts, living it up. Here we go, turn it up, let it start. From block to block, we snatching hearts and jacking marks. And the punk police can't fade me, and maybe we can have peace someday, G. But right now, I got my mind set up, looking down the barrel of my nine. Get up, 'cause it's time to make the payback fat. So my brothers on the block better stay strapped. Black, and accept no substitutes. I bring truth to the